Okay, so because we are sitting in front of your landscapes, I want to start by talking about landscape painting, and particularly New Mexico and Galisteo, because it's so clear that you are so influenced and so respectful of the place that you live in, and it comes out in your work. So when you're approaching landscape, how do you even think about it? Are you doing it in plein air? Or are you doing it in your studio to start with?
I don't have a method. The problem with landscape is it just surrounds you, so it's not something you can easily get away from. You're in it. And so even if you just end up in the studio, you still carry that all with you.
So do you do the work in the studio?
Well,
by memory?
a lot of it, but it's obviously reference to what I drive by every day or walk by. So, yeah, I think to complete it, I might take it inside, you know. We don't always have conducive weather for taking a lot of stuff outside. It gets blown away.
One of the things that I find so exciting about it is the sense of being in it, right? So you're in it whether you're at a distance or you're working really up close. Do you have an intention, like what you want from the landscape when you're working on it, or are you just working intuitively?
Probably both, and as soon as you put one brushstroke, it starts determining the next one, etc. So it's just like a cascade of directions that you hope you can follow.
Japanese landscape painting is very renowned and specific. Your training in Japan, did that influence how you approach landscape?
Yeah, just being in Japan. When I went to Japan, I was 10. I left when I was 15. So when I came back, the ship was in fog outside of San Francisco, so you couldn't see anything. And then the fog, about a mile out, the fog lifted enough so you could see the landscape. And it was such a shock because all the little buildings looked white and you couldn't miss them. Whereas when you come by ship into Japan, you don't see that. All the buildings are there, but they blend into the landscape in such a way that you have to really study to see them. Yeah.
Well, and actually it makes me think about the fact that houses never show up in your landscape. So when you're painting the land, there are rarely people, but we're going to get to that because your portraits have so much in common with your landscapes.
Well, I felt very, very early on that after having lived in Japan, I guess, that I was going to have to create my own landscape to live in. So I started building. I got a little piece of land and I built a house before I was 20. And just to have the surroundings to work from. And I think that's pretty much what I felt even to this day. So but the landscapes some are conducive and some are less so. I find, for instance, big cities, I've lived occasionally in big cities and I don't prefer that, are more difficult.
Because, tell me why.
Because they don't allow you, like the landscape, to feel yourself in it. It's more imposed on you. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say you're at war with it, but there's a certain hostility.
And so when you talk about being in the landscape, you're also Like, so your biography also includes years and years of excavating, of JVS excavating, like your house says.
Well, I had to make a living, and I wanted to make a living with the time that I had. I didn't want to spend it all doing some other kind of work. So I wanted the time that I spent working to be so that it paid well for the time I put in. And, you know, there's a lot of things you can do. I did a lot of all the building trades. And I realized that I might be in here hanging a door or window or something, or plastering or whatever. The guy out there that was digging was making twice as much money. And I said, I better do that or I'll run out of time.
So you built a house in order to house the process of art, of making art, and then you founded an excavating company in order to finance making art. You've been making art since you were 10 years old?
Yeah. I mean, my life is not a straight line. I mean, it's up and down all over the place. And, you know, I tried going to school. I was always interrupted because when we came back from Japan, we had a family business. And so it just wasn't possible to have continuity. And there would always be some emergency that I'd get registered and then have to quit and on and on. But I think the whole thing is trying to figure out with painting. For me, it's a language.
Say more. What do you mean by that?
Well, you know, language is, we have verbal and written language, etc. But painting is a visual language. And it has its own category. It's really distinct. And what happens, and what makes me see that, is going into the cave and thinking about the people that did that so long ago and did these incredible works in caves that were so hard to do. Because I've gone into caves. In Japan, we used to go into caves, and they're very dangerous because if you go far into the cave, there's no light, of course, and there are rock slides and so on, and you finally find a little hole that will go to another chamber. And if you go through it, you realize, what if the rock falls in that hole? You're in here forever. So it's frightening, but there's an intrigue to keep going and to explore. But I keep thinking about the people that went in there and took, with the limited means, and produced these beautiful paintings. How did they do that? First of all, they have to carry in a torch or something, which is going to make it difficult to breathe. You can only have a fire in there so long and you start coughing. And how did they didn't have any means of transporting sketchbooks or cameras or all the things we have now. What did they take in there besides maybe a stick and some pigments? How could that happen? So the only conclusion is, you see, I've been told that I paint images. I sort of rebel against that maybe a little, because if you think of these people, they had to form an image, but they painted ideas.
Mm-hmm.
They ended up in a cave without any reference. Like in landscape, you have a whole references you can always refer to, but when you're in a cave like that, you don't have anything. It's whatever you carry in there that you've garnered from your experience outside and take it in there and then try to make something from it. So that's how I like to think about painting, as a language.
Right. And is it a language that how do you think about the viewer? Is the viewer reading the canvas, or are they hearing the canvas?
It's a great problem, because if you watch people going through a museum, for instance, people spend, I don't know, 20 seconds or something in front of any particular work. And they feel, okay, I've seen that. And they just keep on going. That's not everyone, but that's the majority, let's say. And then someone comes along and stay there all day and look at it. And they're really absorbing it and trying to figure it out.
How would you taught to approach painting when you were a boy in Japan? And remind me who you studied with there.
Well, I studied with two. There was a woman that did a traditional kind of landscape, largely trees, leaves, flowers, related to landscape, but specific items. That was very traditional, that was done with sumi, with a brush and ink. And so I studied with her, and then we found this family, my mother did, and studied with the Yoshida family, which opened a whole other thing, because they were very interested in Western painting as well as Eastern painting. So that opened the whole horizon, you might say.
And how did they teach you? How were you taught to approach both looking and that language?
Well, largely for me, I was only 10 years old, 11 years old, 12 years old, etc. So you were shown the materials, and you copied the master's work. That's
right.
Pretty much how we did. Not so much with the woman. She had more to do with, I would say, the calligraphy of painting, because she had to do with the Japanese brush and the Japanese sumi ink. And so she would correct me on how that's applied. And that's very important, I think, to see that.
And as a young man, you went on to study in California, right?
Well, I went to Mexico City.
You got to
lived there for a while.
Did you meet Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo?
Yeah.
I think you tell me about the story about Frida Kahlo.
Well, she was very ill. And Diego held forth every Wednesday in the Zocalo, and in the late afternoon, and I found out about that and attended. And it was very interesting. It was, for one thing, it was about 15 minutes about art. And he would always start by making a perfect circle, and that sort of set the tone, you might say, and talk about various paintings and painters and so on, and then that launched then into a political discussion, mostly about how bad America was.
About how bad America was. Okay, all right, so that's a good segue then, because you have all of this work that of landscapes and portraits of friends and Galisteans, and then you have all of this political work that, as you're responding to current events constantly, responding through art. Tell me first about the difference, like when you approach something that is from a photograph, from something that you've read about, what's going on for you there?
Well, I don't feel, I don't like the constraint of, and that happened when I went to the university here and the art school in San Francisco, where there were a lot of rules at a certain point. America, had this one kind of teaching up to a point, and then there was New York, and all of a sudden, there was this huge thing of, well, we forget Europe, we've arrived. And so I think that was a very hard thing for me to be constrained. And, you don't paint portraits, you don't do this, you don't do that. And all of a sudden there were all these no-nos. I'm constantly bumping up against that. And
because you were then coming of age in a time that abstraction was that
yeah.
if it was a portrait, it was pop, right? There was
Pop
commentary.
hadn't even happened yet.
Pop hadn't even happened. Okay,
Yeah.
so it was really the abstract movement. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I remember just being in this class, and this girl, we were assigned to do something and then bring it in, and she brought in a picture that she'd painted of people fishing at the ocean side. And the teacher made an example of her, and she left crying. It was cruel. It made me want to go out and go to the beach and do some people fishing.
So when you are, it's like Priscilla's over here, right? When you're approaching a portrait of somebody that you know well, that has been part of your community for years, how do you approach portraiture?
Painting portraits is a discipline. In a landscape, you who knows, that's a tree, everyone knows it's a tree. It doesn't necessarily have a particularness that someone is going to complain about. You didn't get that tree right. Whereas with the portrait, the whole game changes. And so I find it very interesting to force yourself to do that. First of all, the person who is the recipient or who's having a portrait painted be the first one to object. And then, it goes on from there. Someone will say, oh, you didn't do that. You certainly didn't portray that person, and on and on. So it's kind of an interesting thing that it forces you into not just being satisfied with dashing something off. You just have to really put your attention to it. You have to really look. And no one is willing to sit for a portrait anymore, so you have to just sit here and look, like, for instance, right now, and try to see what it is that this person is like, that what is going on here. And then, like in the cave, you have to take that information back and put it down after you're in the dark, so to speak.
Does that information have language other than the paint? Are you looking and saying, I now know this about that person? Or are you feeling your way into, is it a sense of who they are?
Well, it's both of those things, obviously.
Okay.
Yeah, because feeling fine, but at some point, you run right up against the wall of what is actual. And so to you have to get some of that at least.
Do you feel you know a person a lot better once you've done a portrait of them?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but I think I tend to, because it interests me, I tend to look at everyone that I come in contact with and sort of dissect them in terms of their portrait. It's just maybe it's a discipline. Every small thing you do doesn't make a hell of beans here, but if that were a portrait, every little thing changes the whole thing. So it's a whole different. But I enjoy it for that reason, because it forces you to. Yeah, I'm sure you find that in reading. You can read through something and just oh, that's okay, I get that, and just ramble on. Or you can read each word and really get what's going on there. So it's a.
And tell me about your fascination with meteorites.
Maybe that comes out of portraiture too, and caves and more primitive states of being, because you wonder where we came from. And now that it seems more and more likely that we came from somewhere else. And so that part is really fascinating to me. That we can look out in the ground all around us and find clues to our origins that not necessarily of this planet, which, turns on its head everything we thought about, of how we came to be, etc. So I think it's that part of being alive today is really interesting.
It's not uncommon in your work that there should be a hidden face.
Well, I think that might refer to those things we just talked about. That where do these things come from? Where they're all around us, really. And if you extend that to the animal life that we live with, a lot of times we walk right by a lot of life. And so from very, very early, I think I was interested in snakes particularly, but things that most people walk by and notice.
And you've done a lot of portraits of snakes.
I have.
And when you do, are you looking for that same specificity about the snake that you are about your neighbor when you're painting that?
Well, yes. The specifics of each species are what you want to find. I mean, what you want to define. Not just a ribbon, but it's a rattlesnake. Someone who looks at that can see that it is, and so on.
And are you looking for a rattlesnake or that rattlesnake?
Well, probably that rattlesnake, but they do have things in common. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just remind me about your history with snakes, which I know started when you were quite young, and then you've gone on to be the snake man in Galisteo. Tell me about that.
Well, I found a snake. We lived in Chicago when I was young, and I crawled up on the railroad tracks and found a snake, and everyone said there's no snakes in Chicago. That sort of followed me, but my godmother went out and brought me Raymond Ditmar's Snakes of the World from that experience, and that was it. Going to Japan, all those snakes was really cemented in all. Yeah.
Is it something you love about living in Galisteo, the snakes?
Well, I've lived in a lot of different places and I always find the snakes that are there. And the thing about the snakes in Galisteo is if I just looked around by myself, I might see 2 or 3. But by providing a service to remove the snakes for people that are afraid of them, I get to see hundreds. So it's really not, people think, oh my God, thank you for doing this service. No. That's not what's going on here. You're helping me, if that makes sense to you.
That does make sense to me. So I want to just finish with then one question about the big painting in the reptile room of the Cub Scout with the snake. Tell me about it.
I had painted that, that painting has gone through several stages. I had this grandson who was living in California, and they sent me a picture. They took him to see an aircraft carrier as part of a school thing. They all got dressed in their uniforms, and so they sent me a picture of that. It was so striking up against that big gray ship, and I had painted this painting of the rattlesnake, and it, you know, it was okay, but it needed something, and there it was. So the whole thing came together in a perfect way. I felt that there was a place for the Cub Scout in this constellation.
Was the snake originally intended as a constellation?
No, it wasn't until added the Cub Scout, and then it became the Cub Scout constellation.
Right.